That's just the way I need to start my Friday morning is big gong to the dome.
We should set that with every day. It should be the alarm clock.
God, can you imagine? Greg, what's up? How you feeling, dude?
I'm tired. I got to be frank with you. So it feels good though. I'm back home. I got some sleep. I feel good. Feel good.
That's
tired,
good.
to be clear.
Tired. Yeah, I'd say I woke up today at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning Chicago, or 2 in the morning Chicago time, and was at Midway Airport just over an hour ago. So I was a little bit worried whether I was going to make it for the show or not. But
did you leave Did you stay overnight in Chattanooga, or did you?
We left. Me and Will left at like 10 a.m. out of Chattanooga yesterday, and we flew and did a quick stop in St. Petersburg to visit Tim. So Will needed to be back early morning, so he booked a 5 a.m. flight out of Tampa.
Oh man, did you make it the space store?
I was not able to, no. So I was looking it up, and I was trying to figure out if I can get there before I go to the airport. But I was like, I have no idea, like where.
For future reference, it's at just look up FreightWaves headquarters because that's where it's at. It's an old retail space that was like this long hallway we didn't know what to do with, and that's what the space store is. So next time you're in town,
I will definitely be going next time. But honestly, there was so much there was so much activity going on at F3 this year that it was just hard to find, honestly, downtime to go, which is a good thing,
Yeah, that is a good thing. I'm glad to hear that.
So,
how would you contextualize this event versus past ones? Like, what were the vibes like, you think, generally?
It was a smaller group. I think it wasn't necessarily a fewer number of companies, just the number of people that went was smaller. Like last year, we could have had 10, a company would have sent 10 people to send 2 people this time. I think the freight recession has forced a lot of travel budgets back. But I think the people that were there were there to do deals. They were there like wanting to do things. I think there was an eagerness to get things done. So the people that were there were the right people. And I think that makes a difference because the conversations you're having this year, say versus last year, were people who were the decision makers. And I think that actually matters. So
that was actually
do you get
noticeable.
Do you have any sense for like the impact? Like, is there any attribution of deals back to events that you are privy to in any way? Like, do you survey people or anything like that?
We do. So there's 2 types of things we do. We do surveys, sort of post-event surveys. Those it depends on who responds to them. You typically get like 2 types of, it's very skewed, right? That sort of inverse bell curve problem when you do surveys. You get people who are really mad about something. So like they didn't like something, and there's a whole array of those things. So some of that feedback is productive, some of it's not. If you start to see patterns in the feedback, then you're like, okay, this is an issue. And we're pretty sensitive to that. I mean, we take this stuff pretty serious. And then you get people who like had an amazing time and are super positive, and that tells you things that people like. And again, you're looking for pattern recognition. Like you tend to, I wouldn't say you ignore the exceptions, but what I have found with surveys is that the people who respond to them have very strong opinions either way, and tends to be negative responses tend to be better. But we do, like, the good news for us is we check NPS scores. Those tend to be incredibly high. Our surveys tend to do very well. But the feedback itself, you're not getting a lot. Now, as it relates to like impacts of the business, the local travel association does like an economic impact to Chattanooga, which is sizable. I mean, you're talking probably $5 to $10 million is sort of the range that we would say that we brought to the community over the course of a couple of days. I think the first year it was around 5 million. I would say that it's probably equal to that this year. Last year, maybe a little higher just because we had more people. And then we hear a lot of anecdotal things of, so-and-so raised money. this company did a couple of deals, and that usually is more anecdotal. People aren't typically reaching out and saying, "Hey, I did this," but I've heard multiple stories where company got bought, conversation happened at our event, company raised money, and they made those introductions. And that's everybody from lean logistic. If you take lean staffing, their first introduction into this space, so sort of coming out party, not introduction because they were pre-existing, but sort of coming out party was 2018. It's actually where they found their first investor was at our event in Atlanta. Emerge is the same thing. They found their first investors there. So like we know that's impactful, and that stuff matters.
Yeah.
I definitely heard it even from like the Lyft drivers, like going to and from the event. They were like, it's just like noticeable. There's something going on, and and eventually they were catching on that it's a freight event. But we were getting questions all the time, like, why, what's going on? There's so many people in town. So that's awesome that it brings that. $5 to $10 million is pretty sizable.
Yeah, I mean, Chattanooga is not a huge city. I mean, it's a small city. In the metro area is about 500,000. In the sort of local downtown area, which is where we're concentrated, or the city itself is like 180,000. So, you bring in 1,000 people, but more importantly, there are a lot of, Chattanooga hosts a lot of like regional sporting, even like the Ironman is here, and a lot of church groups come here. But when you get a big corporate event where people have expense reports and expense accounts and stuff, they're going to drop a lot more money on the city than you would get with like a church group. And so it's a nice thing to do for Chattanooga. We enjoy it. I think Chattanooga does really well. The weather, probably the downside this year were obviously the freight recession cut back people's, eagerness to travel. And then the weather wasn't as great as we wanted. I was a little like, I got to be frank. We had this conversation as a group right at the aquarium night, the second night. And we were in a bit of a panic because it was getting cold. And I'm like, the stuff is outside. So we were in like a go, no go decision. And finally my team was like, come on, man. And I was, when you're tired, you're like extra cold, like your butt. So I was like freezing out there, and I'm like, nobody's gonna enjoy this. But it turned out well. I don't know if you guys stayed for the after party, but I thought that was pretty cool.
I smoked a cigar.
It was a cool scene. I mean, that bridge is old, man. That bridge is like literally like 150 years old or something. They're actually going to redo it.
The conference was like 2 weeks earlier last year, right?
It was. Well, we held it this year in late November, which I actually think that may have also impacted the amount of people that came, just because of the
for
people
sure.
tend to do their holiday things and may not want back-to-back travel. But we held it because the election was the only other dates we had. We originally had booked the election dates. And as we started looking at the calendar, we're like, this doesn't
probably that was a good decision.
Really good. Although judging by our audience, it may have been like a big celebration, but people would have been distracted.
According to the survey that we ran on Freight Caviar, it was 83% of the people that responded, voted the way they went.
I'm glad you guys did that, because I think that's, anecdotally, that's probably true. I would say that's pretty much true, right?
Representative too.
Representative, but also just good to have hard data. But even nobody knew, and I think it also, on election night, people want to be around their local friends and family. And, so I think it was good. It was a good decision.
How long have you been doing the FreightWaves events for now? Since
2018. So that was the first year. We've held 2 events. I think the spring event. So typically it started out as a spring event in April, and it's gotten moved to June. Scheduling was difficult after COVID, just because events exploded. And but I think we're actually going to cancel the big spring event and go to these, what I call small micro events. So one of the challenges of putting on events is like, how broad of an event do you want? F3 is topics, everything from Adam Wingfield, the FMCSA stuff, to technology, to, the market and stuff. And so it's hard to sort of do that twice a year because it's pretty broad. I think what we're going to do next year is be much more targeted, where it may be, you're not going to get 2,000 people to show up to an event on, say, freight fraud. But you may get 200 people, but those 200 people in the room like want to be there, are interested in the topic, are obviously impacted by the topic. And so those are the things that we're thinking about. We're probably going to do, so a freight fraud one we're definitely doing. We're probably going to do a reindustrialization conference.
Awesome.
You know, we may do something in Mexico. This came up. Adrian, you know, friend of the show.
Yeah.
Friend of the family, if you will, suggested doing one in Guadalajara. I'm open to the idea. I think one of the things we can do is create these more micro targeted events. Maybe a 1 day, not 3 day. I also think 3 days may be a little long. It's a big commitment. So I think next year we may go to like 2 days and do the Freight Tech Awards in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but those are things we're talking through. We have a lot of ideas, and actually today at noon, we're going to head back in the office. My team may not like that, but we want to get all the ideas
while they're fresh
and figure out, okay, what can we do better? And this is sort of it's the thing we do where we sort of figure, okay, we didn't like this, we like this. I mean, we have a list of things we want to fix or address. No need to go into all the details here.
Sure.
But we tend to probably notice things more than most people do about our own events. You tend to be more critical about your own stuff than you do than other people are. And so we'll do that and try to figure out what we can do better.
What was your favorite fireside you did at this one?
There were probably two that stood out. I really liked the one with Adam Wingfield. I felt like of all the ones that I did, I learned the most. I mean, he broke down the FMCSA, Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse 2, as they call it, better than I think anybody. I mean, he had solid facts. He was really passionate, knew the details. And I would say there's probably 3 of them that I really enjoyed. David Parker, I thought did an awesome job. And he was very humble, very straightforward, answered the questions, was talking about some of the crises they had as a business and was pretty open about it and frankly passionate about it. And then I thought the one with Doug Wagner was great. I enjoyed those 3 were probably my 3. It's hard over time. They sort of run together. And there were highlights in all of them. I think some of them were like a little harder, but there were a few. I mean, Cindy Lee, you know, this isn't a small, like she runs a small business. You know, we're bringing him a lot higher profile, maybe much bigger businesses than hers. But it was fun to have someone local who's kind of a firecracker that says stuff that's off the hip. And I was kind of fun hearing her sort of various anecdotes about her business. I mean, this is a non-typical. I mean, she said I hire older people, and I'm like, well, what's old? Because she's like probably 65 or something. And I'm like, what's old? And she's like 30. And I'm like, geez, like. I'm 45.
I'm about on that standard then. Damn.
But we're all like, there's a freight bro. I mean, you guys are probably like, what are you guys, 30 something?
I'm 29.
31.
Yeah. You are you guys are the freight bro generation. I am like, I'd be a senior.
Craig's there too. Craig,
we'll include you. Well, you're an honorary freight bro. How about that?
I was a freight bro in the 20 years ago. So I was in the sort of Gen 1 freight bros.
What'd you think of Dan Lewis's talk?
Yeah, it's funny because like you asked, Bill Drygart and Dan were also great talks. Dan was interesting. One of the things it's not gotcha journalism. And it was both Dan had made a comment to someone. He was worried that it was going to hammer him and ask him a lot of really pointed questions. And then Nikola was also worried about the same thing for different reasons. Nikola's a public company, but they've had sort of this tortured history. Dan is a failed company, but had sort of a charmed history and then not at all. I think Dan was cautious, but I also I'm not gotcha journalism. I don't need to hammer a guy about what happened. I was more wanting, I didn't think it would be very helpful to sort of dive into the depths of what happened. Only if he wanted to share them, was happy to do it. But what I wanted him to do is just sort of unpack the story. And this is the first interview he's done since Convoy failed. And so at least public interview,
like the first big event he's done.
It's first event he's done, and to my knowledge, he's not done any sort of podcast or recording about convoys. This is the first sort of coming out.
Yeah.
And I think it's a bit. Look, I think it was cathartic for him because he was able to sort of tell his version of the story But he's also, I mean, they still have pending lawsuits. Like he's got to be careful what he offers up. So he can't go into like the depths of things.
Wow.
And
so even after a company kind of is winding down, I guess those lawsuits like just don't go away.
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem. You raise money. If you go bankrupt, it's the worst thing you can possibly do to a company and founders. I don't think a lot of founders realize this, and this is one of the reasons that when companies start cutting employees the hard thing for a lot of founders, particularly, I'm more seasoned. I've put my time in through multiple startups. But when you're an early founder, and this isn't, I wouldn't necessarily say this is Dan's case, but I think for other founders, is you start running out of money and you're like, oh, I can just shut this thing down and end it. But the problem is if you go to bankruptcy, because you're not returning all the money you owe, you're not paying your creditors, perhaps you haven't paid your employees, and your investors have gotten screwed. Every single one of those folks are going to come after you, and you're going to be caught up in all these depositions and held, potentially held personally liable. And so the worst thing you could possibly do to a company is put it into bankruptcy. Yeah. And so, if I'm a founder, I'm doing everything I can to sort of like get rid of every cost I can and avoid that at all. And the problem with Dan's business, it was too big. They were way upside down by the time that they actually shut the doors. So unfortunately, he was sort of stuck in that. So there's still lawsuits. Those lawsuits will probably take a couple of years that they'll have to be out. And he certainly is a major witness to that.
Yeah,
it's brutal, man.
I felt his answers were all very genuine. You could see kind of the pain in his voice, and people like to rip on them, and maybe it's deserved to some extent, but like, I don't know. He seemed like an honest person.
Sentiment. I heard positive sentiment on X after that talk took place, and everybody was basically, saying how underappreciated it is, that how much Convoy pushed, things forward. Absolutely. And I only heard positive things, honestly, after that.
I'm happy to hear that. Look, I've known Dan for years. I consider him friends. Even when we were covering the sort of their end of their business, I still, I was hoping he would still consider me a friend, frankly, because like I have a job to do. Like you guys, media, so you appreciate this. Yeah. It's like you're telling a story, and you got to make it interesting. You got to be sort of transparent about what's happening. You guys tend to take yourself a little less serious than we do.
And in some cases too, it's just fair, accurate to the best that we can, accurate reporting, and sometimes it's not an easy decision.
Look, we have
you guys, obviously, but
we all have a responsibility to. I think, look, the industry expects us to tell a story, and the problem is if you only point out negative things about your friends, or negative things about your enemies and positive things about your friends, then you're not really that credible. And so it was hard because I felt a lot of personal pain. Empathy for Dan as a friend, and also someone I admire. I have an enormous amount of admiration for Dan. But I think to his credit, two things. One is I think they should deserve more credit about what they did for this industry, because they did make it cool.
100%.
They did elevate. They're I almost said this on stage, and I was kind of like, I better probably not say it. But trucking has a redneck kind of sort of image, right? Like a blue collar image, and a lot of people look down on it. And I think what Dan or Convoy did is they made them into heroes. He talks about the baseball cards. I thought that was.
They're almost like martyrs of the industry in a sense. Like, absolutely. That's a strong title to give somebody. But I think in some way you can argue it, right? They made the ELD got a bunch of onboard equipment, right? And everyone talks about like how bad the ELD is. But if anything, there's one good thing from like a tech standpoint is that they interconnected all of the equipment out there to an extent.
Absolutely.
Right?
But
and
go ahead.
But like I was just gonna say, like that is similar to Convoy. Like drivers weren't using apps. Like I was trying. When I was at Echo, 2016, 2017, they rolled out their app. Trying to get carriers to use an app is impossible.
Yeah.
Like it's really hard.
Yeah, and I think. I think there's two sides to that, right? Like one is the technology element, which like they pay with blood. They spend an enormous amount of money doing so. And the second element, Reed, and I think. So that's the tech side of it, right? That's the important sort of generational shift, and everyone will benefit from that. It's the thing that is easy to sort of punk on Dan and Convoy for like losing money, but everyone's a beneficiary of that.
100%. It's almost like, I mean, the upfront investment required to push behavior to the extent that they did is like astronomical. Like,
Absolutely.
and there's no guarantee of success. Like,
Well,
when
obviously,
people like dunk on the failure, I'm like, you're a loser if you're dunking on failure like that. Like, you have no idea how hard that is.
The
like,
other side of that coin is that money that was raised was looking for a home, right? And it was presented as an opportunity, to those investors. And like at the time, they made their decisions. And
dude, these are not grandmas. Like, these are not taking pensions and retirements from grandmas. This is like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos. They're not going to miss the $900 million. It sucks to lose that money, but the group of investors knew what they were getting into. They knew the risks.
It was a swing of the bat,
It was a swing of the bat, and a damn good chance of it at least winning. I think in some ways, it's sort of like when a team, like when Alabama loses. When Nick Saban was running out, was in charge of Alabama. When Alabama loses, it's shocking because they lost, right? Because you're like, they had everything that possibly, or they have a down season. And I think I look at Convoy the same way, is they had the right roster of investors. They had really smart people that understood the problem. They had built a really fantastic brand. They were getting, a major, they were growing this business substantially. And we're only surprised because they lost, I think is the bigger story. But Reed, you pointed out something, and I think this is probably the most important piece of it, is they made trucking cool. Like, they think about and Dan talked about this. Think about all of the people that they recruited into this industry that would
100%.
not have considered trucking. And I think we owe some debt to that fact. And I think that's the legacy that will live on. And I hope Dan goes out and starts a second business and in trucking. And I hope that, and I think first of all, I think he has investors, and I know some of them. I don't know them personally, but I know of them. And I've had conversations with people that his networks. Investors will easily write him a check. Like, that's the thing that people forget, is like in Silicon Valley, failing is sort of a badge of honor. And he now has a story of like what went wrong to those investors. So he'll easily raise more money. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him back with a huge raise of capital and some big idea. And I hope that he does it in Freight. I think we'd be better for it.
Yeah, people bringing more resources into it, like into this industry, as opposed to having them go else.
This industry elevated what Convoy did for our industry. Is it and others, like, it's not just Convoy, but like, they've elevated the game for everybody else. They forced everybody else. Reed, you pointed out, and I think you're absolutely right. Like, when you're at Echo, you're trying to get people on apps. And what Convoy did was they figured out how to do that. And it forced everyone else to sort of play the same game. But our industry is far better because of Convoy than it ever was bad. I think it's I have enormous amount of respect for Dan coming into the fire. And just like, it's hard to do, man, as a founder who has failed before, face an audience who's a little skeptical of you and not knowing. Like, Dan and I didn't prep. I didn't say, hey, I'm not going to hammer you. He trusted me to come, and I appreciate that. And I owed him the same thing. I owed him some dignity and not being a dick on stage. I think would have been just it wouldn't have done anything for him nor me. But I respect the fact that he showed up. And I said this, it was interesting because like people were dunking on Ken Adamo yesterday about our website went down for like 15 minutes. And Ken was like, I hope you get it fixed. And people were dunking on Ken. And I'm like, look, I know Ken. Ken and I have substantial disagreements on a number of business issues, and we are competitors. But the thing I respect about Ken is in the summer, he came into the fire too, came into a debate in a hostile territory and came in and won. And I respect someone who does that. So it's always the people who sit on the sideline and whine and just dunk on people. And I'm thinking specifically about our friends that don't like memes. Is like, they just sit there and whine the whole time, but they're not, they don't come into the ring. Like, at least be a part of the conversation about feeling like you're left out.
Get into the arena.
Get into the arena, man. It's not like, it's hard. You guys know this. Like, especially when you do it public, whether it's Dan or what you guys are doing or what I'm doing, is like we're out in public and we're going to take an enormous amount of criticism. It's easy to be.
Yeah.
That's the best place to get ideas fleshed out, right?
And feedback, man.
Public criticism is
feedback.
Yeah, exactly. Get as much feedback and criticism on those ideas and spar them out. And
you have to avoid. I think part of it is you got to sort of separate the people who are just throwing shade for the trolls that are just doing it to like be provocative, to people who actually have something to offer.
Being a troll is really easy.
Reed, you are a troll. You are you're the OG troll that's actually gone straight. You started out as a troll and then you went straight. So
but you can be a troll, but like being a troll at the end of the day is like just kind of overrated, like if you want to actually do anything, you gotta kind of figure out how to toe the line between sometimes trolling, sometimes doing other stuff. You got to find that balance, and that balance is slightly different for everybody. And I do have troll tendencies, but I feel like lately I've been trying to when I troll, I try to troll lovingly, not to try to tear people down.
And you absolutely, like you have a pretty, like you've always been provocative. You've always had this sort of like humor and wit to you. And you could have become a complete asshole.
I know.
And built a pretty good audience about it. But you've never made it personal. Like even when you've trolled me or when I get trolled, it's a humor. But I have haters that like that will just pounce on anything and everything, and there's nothing but they like that's all they do. And I'm like, dude, don't you have something better to do with your life than like worry about what I'm up to? Like, get a life. Like, move on to another. Like, I don't care that you exist. I finally I don't know if I'm flattered is the right term, but like the fact that you're that obsessed, like, is a pretty sad. Your life is not mine.
Yeah, you own a lot of real estate in people's heads, Greg. That's for sure.
I know, fortunately or unfortunately, and a lot of it.
But that's how you know you're doing something. There's almost like a direct correlation between haters and impact. At the end of the day,
there's a friend of mine that runs a social media influencer, and it's like a real business. It's a $100 million revenue business. But they go out and track influencer data, and it's a data business. They go to like major cosmetic companies, major beauty companies, major consumer brands, and say, okay, if you're launching a product in this category, who are the influencers that are up and coming, or who should you be partnering with?
Yeah.
And he told me, so they mine all this data off of all the major platforms, and he told me, he's like, I asked him about the whole troll, and he's like, those are your best. That's the best members of your audience because they drive enormous amounts of engagement to your content, and they're actually part of your ecosystem. And this actually goes back to, Taylor Swift. There was an interesting stat that's floating around X. I don't know if it's true, but it seems credible. Something like Taylor Swift was like 1.8% of all record sales this year, or like music revenue with her. In fact, if she were her own genre, she'd be a top 10 genre worldwide of music. Wow. So woman who like there is an enormous amount of trolls of Taylor Swift. Like, let's just be frank. There's also people who love her. Like, she lives rent free in so many people's heads. Yeah. But part of her audience are the people who hate her. I mean, she's turned the haters into part of the storyline for her music as well as her brand. And I think there's something to be learned from that.
100%. I mean, you either want to be, if you're trying to do something, you either want to be loved or hated. Like,
you want to be
anywhere in between. Anywhere in between is like immemorable.
It's true even in dating circles, right? Like, I'm married. I'm happily married. I've been married for 8 years now. But when I was single, the whole idea is like, if you sort of look at how dating works, is you want to be remembered. You like, the last thing you want to do when you meet a girl is her not remember you. And so like, we call it shit posting or trolling. It kind of works in some of the dating circles because at least she'll remember you, and that turns into attraction at some point, even if it's negative at first. So,
funny enough, that's I've noticed that actually extends beyond dating too. It's
in business, it extends. I mean, I've had people like salespeople who I found incredibly obnoxious, but they got my attention, even if they annoyed the shit out of me. And I turned into do business with them. I turned to do deals with them because like I was so annoyed with them that I'm like, I spent effort and energy like meeting this person or talking to this person, and they ended up turning it into a transaction of sorts. And so I think attention is important. This is the attention economy, and good or bad, you got to get it. And so, look, I don't set out. The reality is, I don't set out to actually attract trolls. It's not. There are people. Reed, I think you actually, to a degree, probably do a little bit. You're actually setting out to a little bit snarkier than I do. That's not my goal. I just get them by way of my opinions, and so I'm not intentional. Like I don't intentionally like seek it out, but I do get it, and I'm sort of like I used to hate it. Now I kind of embrace it. So.
You get used to it.
Yeah.
You get used to it. You get thicker skin, and you start to realize, like Ken Adamo was one of my biggest trolls 2 years ago.
I remember it. It was
like harsh. And I actually used to laugh about it. I would watch some of his videos where he would just come after me, and I'm just like, I'm sort of chuckle. And it like at first it just pissed me off. And now, and it's funny because like it's changed over the last couple of years, but also like he's come into the ring. Like he came into X. And like we were all talking shit about DAT at the time.
Yeah, right.
And like he came into the thing and he didn't like come with a vengeance to want to prove something. He came in and participated in the conversation. So even when you throw shade at DAT, he doesn't like get overly defensive. I have an enormous amount of respect for that.
Props honestly to him.
He's honestly like a pretty top tier shit poster too. He's
very snarky.
Dunk on you with like 2 words. Like
he's
like, oh man,
I like Ken. I can't believe I'm saying that 2 years later. After all the shit that he used to say, but like, give the man credit. He deserves it, and I respect that. And like, it's not, none of this stuff's personal. I mean, it is for some people, and we take it personal. But like, at the end of the day, they run a business that I compete with. I don't particularly love some of their business practices. I think our product is better than theirs, but give Ken credit. He's doing right by their company by standing in the fire, man, making them relevant, which they weren't. Let's be honest. They really weren't relevant until he kind of showed up.
Yeah, he's definitely, I think, been a good public face for the brand. I think.
And I shouldn't say relevant because it's not true. They're absolutely relevant from a market standpoint, but they weren't relevant from a sort of the social brand of it, right?
Yeah.
It was boring marketing speak. A lot of it was sort of like boring marketing speak, which just is like meh. And then he shows up, particularly on X, which is got to bring your game, man.
Yeah, Ken is literally DAT's like modern main marketer, to be honest.
Yeah. I still want to kick their ass, and I want to kick his ass, but I mean that in a loving way. So sure. I mean that in a Mike Tyson kind of way, right?
Mike Tyson big ball. Well,
yeah. I mean, if my fight would be real, I'd actually throw some punches. Although our debate felt like when we went up against him, it felt like we were throwing pillows and he was throwing punches. So we deserved to get punched that time. So
let's talk about some tech stuff. You recently, I think maybe last week, tweeted something like you're hearing that freight tech companies are having a hard time raising money. People might be in trouble. Like, what do you think the general state of the market for those sorts of people is? Because there's a lot of vendors at these events. I've been to a bunch of events in the last 6 months, and
there's a lot of new vendors.
There's a ton of vendors. Yeah.
So there's also a lot of vendors that aren't there. Like even some of but it's interesting because it doesn't mean if they didn't show up that they're doing poorly. I mean, Platform Science is a good example. They used to be one of our biggest sponsors and supporters and bring an army of people, and they haven't been to our conferences in 2.5 years, frankly, because they've booked so much business that they've got a substantial backlog. So you can't read into that. But look, I talk to a lot of investors. I sort of sit in two worlds. I sit in the freight world, but I like traditional freight world, but I also happen to sit around a lot of venture capitalists. I talk to a lot of VCs on a regular basis, and these things, we all talk among each other. I think there's sort of a newer generation of companies that are trying to make a name for this. Truck Parking Club is a great example. Qt is a good example. Highway is a good example that are doing quite well. By the way, Ree, congrats to you guys. You guys are killing it. I got the, I don't know if it was you or someone else to give me the update on the business, but you guys are absolutely killing it. And you've got to be one of the fastest growing freight tech companies out there. So congrats on that. But then there's a sort of these later generation companies. There's sort of we call them Gen 1 VC companies. Think about the VC generation for freight tech. It was really 2015 before venture capitalists sort of discovered it. That's like Convoy, that's Transfix, LoadSmart, all those companies that sort of started in that generation. A lot of those companies are struggling. And the question really comes to how much money do they still have on their balance sheet to sort of withstand it? If they can survive long enough, chances are they'll be around. If they can't survive because they run out of cash, it's a totally different situation. And I think we'll see a lot of deal making over the next year as companies sort of get, they're not hitting their marks and they're having to make different decisions. And I think that will drive a lot of deal making.
Are you seeing that more companies are getting started in this space? It's the same amount? Is it fewer?
I think it's the same amount with a little bit less splash than perhaps we had Gen 1s. The founders that are coming into the space now are the former Convoy employees. They are the former Transfix employees, the next freight kind of folks. They may have gone and worked at a merge or went and worked for they went and worked for Sonar. And, because businesses either they, got sold and went out of business, or those executives left and went and did something else. I think you get a different kind of generation of founder. And so I think we're on to our second generation. And I think it's still early. VC is still trying to figure out whether they want to be in freight tech. That's why you don't see a lot of splash right now. You see people just grinding. But I do think we'll start to see that as the market, as things sort of move on.
So you launched about a year ago, you launched a contest, F3 memes, hashtag F3 memes.
Yeah.
And that was I think it was the day after, last year's.
You guys remember how that came about, right?
Eric
Johnson
at
the JOC was really upset he wasn't invited to the party. So he decided to meme us, or decided to post these are logistics people, are serious people, and you can't meme yourself into the consciousness of the industry.
Yeah, that is how. Yeah, that's right.
That was the day. The last day of F3 where you said that. And
it was.
You said that tweet. I thought he was talking about me.
Well, I think he was posting you for certain, because you are the OG memer.
Yeah.
But he was. I think he was left out of the party, and I think he hated seeing us all have fun. And so we turned that into a thing. And so we did F3 memes. And I said, if anyone memes for a whole year, they'll get free admission. We had 2 people that completed the challenge, Ben and Will, and respect to them. And now they have permanent lifetime access to F3.
Will's still going, guy.
I know. He's like a 377 or something. Yeah, I get it. I love the fact that he's embraced it, because a lot of people did it for like a week or a month, and then they all dropped out. We all got busy. Those guys stayed in it. I respect that. So,
and just so we're clear, I asked Will, I'm like, Will, are you spending one day a week and you're coming up with 7 or at a time and queuing them up? He's like, no, I do it literally every day.
I love it, man. You gotta that's a hell of a commitment
discipline too, right?
You guys know this, and this is the thing I think that differentiates you guys and certainly us and others is from the pact is doing content every day and staying in a cadence of content is the reason most people never make it to build something. You see these influencers that come about and they start something and they sort of fizzle out and you forget about them. You're like, whatever happened to them? And it's because they didn't stay long enough to actually make the magic work and hit that inflection point, because it's fucking hard work, man. Showing up every day. So my personal writing is pretty sporadic. I get inspired and I'll write 10 articles, literally, like I did that a couple weeks ago, and I may not write for a month. So I know how hard it is to be inspired. It's even harder when you're doing it on your own. So the fact that Will is he's doing it every day is pretty remarkable.
It's really remarkable. And I'll actually just speak to that point. I was never a person that could post content regularly. Like I tried a freight tech startup before, Freight Caviar and Shipper CRM, and that was not my realm of things, right? And so the one, I don't know, piece of advice I might have based off of what I've gone through now is like surround yourself with people that are good at that. And if you have a technical background, because I don't post most of our content, I do contribute here and there, but for the most part, like there's people that are really good at that.
You have a fantastic reporter. I had the chance to meet her.
Adriana's awesome.
Yeah, she does a great job. I enjoy her newsletter. I think she does a really good job of bringing the roundup, and the style that you guys do is amazing. As a media exec, I respect what you guys do. You have your lane that's different than our lane, and it works. And I really admire what you guys have built. And I'm very similar to you. I never imagined myself as a media person. Like I didn't even know that I had the instincts for it. I think a lot of it is instinctual, right?
I've only known you actually as a media person, right? So that's like, for me, that's weird to hear that, because as far as I can remember, I think it was like 2016, 2015.
We started in 17.
Okay, 17,
would have been 17, and it sort of really was accidental to get there. But I never imagined I would be in media, or even in first of all, wouldn't imagine I would actually build a media company, much less even enjoy it if I did. But it's starting into my thing, and it's a lot of it's instinctual. I mean, Reed, you know this. You built a brand that you now leverage into something different.
Yeah.
You guys at Freight Caviar are doing it sort of top of funnel to feed Shipper CRM and happen to build an interesting business out of it. So that's what it takes. But it's the good news about Christian is you and I and our businesses is I told Reed this early on, is media businesses are not investable. And so the good news is it means that it's a pretty big moat, because you got to put your own money to work, and it doesn't pay very well. So it's hard to build scale in that business. So,
but Craig, when did you realize that aspect of building out that just kind of that megaphone, I guess you can, it's kind of like how we call it, as this ability, to
distribution.
It was sort of three moments, and they all happened in 2017. So we had I tried to get media and PR for what was then the Freight Futures product we were building. And it was really hard to get anyone, even the local newspaper in Chattanooga wouldn't even cover the story. And I talked to this PR person in the industry, and she told me the story was too hard, that it was too complicated. She didn't want to cover it. And so I was like, man, I can't get press. I've always had a knack for getting the media to pick up my stories, even when I was in other businesses, but I couldn't get press. And I was like, what the hell? So we ended up talking to this, it was Convoy's PR person, the person that ran Convoys. And he's like, look, I'll take you on, but it's $40,000 a month retainer to take you on as a PR guy. And I'm like, that's all of our money. I can't do that. So he's like, look, if I were you, I would hire somebody to do social media posts. And this is actually what we thought we were going to do, is just write social media blogs on LinkedIn. And a guy named Brian Strait applied for the job. He was the editor of Fleet Owner magazine. And I brought him on, and I told him, look, you can't write about futures the whole time. You got to write about other stories, and let's try to build some traffic. And so he did, and he came on, and it was successful. And then he went on vacation, and the hurricanes hit Florida. It was Hurricane, I can't remember the name of it. Not Florida, Houston. Harvey, thank you, back in 2017. And I had just happened to have ran FEMA disaster logistics at US Express. And so I wrote these stories about what to expect when expecting a hurricane, and the site just blew up. And it was at that point I realized, hey, we're onto something. The second thing happened is, so that started to build initial traffic. The second thing that happened is blockchain was becoming a big topic in freight circles.
Oh yeah, the beta.
Yeah, beta. And I was like, hey, this is a great way to get in front of technology companies. We sort of exported blockchain thing for a hot minute. But more importantly, someone said I was a blockchain expert. I don't even know how they said it. And I sort of embraced it. Sort of like the DOT secretarieship. It's like,
sure.
If somebody wants to make it a thing, I'll embrace it. I'll run this as much as I can. And so we created the BITA, which is Blockchain and Transport Alliance. That thing blew up. I think at our first event, I said, and we had a room at Georgia Tech for 40 people. Like, we were going to bring 40 people to this little conference. And we said, if you're a member of BITA, you could come to this event in November. And we had reserved this room in Georgia Tech. And it blew up, and we had like 300 members by November. And I was like, holy shit. So that was the second thing that sort of like, I got this reality, like, people want to be a part of it. And then it became just a thing in itself where we started to realize it could drive top of funnel with the rest of our business. So those were like, it was actually completely accidental. Like, I never realized that I'd be a media exec or had a knack for it. And obviously I do. And, I built a media business that works.
You're an opinionated person and you're not afraid to share it, which is what makes it work, right?
I think opinions matter, absolutely, but they have to be informed and credible, even if they're wrong. Yes. Like, I say things that I get wrong. I have opinions that are polarizing, and that's okay. The fact that if people didn't think it had credibility, then obviously it wouldn't matter at all. You'd just be a troll. And that's where I think the difference between being a troll versus having an opinion. I mean, Andrew Silver is another person that's actually sort of embraced the moment as well. Is like, he's turned it into his own brand, using his experience, and he's credible. Like, he's built the business, he's been in the industry, and whether you agree with him or disagree with him, he has an opinion that matters. So
we had him on actually last week to share his thoughts about the whole Uber Freight announcement. So that was interesting, and it's good to hear, directly from how somebody with credibility,
like, this industry doesn't have. There's not a lot of. I mean, you go to like tech industries or SaaS, because the old joke in B2B SaaS. What did I learn from B2B SaaS? In freight, you have a lot of people with strong opinions, but they don't voice them. They're not embracing the moment. I think Andrew's done it.
Yeah.
I've done it. You guys are
I got to do it. I got to personally do it a little bit more, but yeah.
I mean, like, you have your own. I mean, you've built your own. It's interesting because, I think Freight Caviar is a thing, right? In some ways, maybe that's better than what I built at FreightWaves from the standpoint that, like, you could disintermediate yourself out of that. And I think the Freight Caviar brand would stand on its own. Like, it could be something that could stand on its own.
That was a goal from.
It's absolutely worked.
With Paul, like, that was a goal from day one. Was we were reading these books like Traction and E-Myth or whatever, and it was like, how do you build a business that eventually is not required for your presence to be there? Because then you don't have a business; it's really just you. So
yeah, I mean, Paul has certainly probably identified more. People identify more with Paul with Freight because he's got the video thing, but he's 100%. Certainly. I think to a degree, your Freight Caviar can stand on its own. FreightWaves is a little different, frankly, for better or worse. In some ways, and this is actually, I think, in some ways, detriment's the wrong term, but like to anything I say reflects on my brand, the FreightWaves brand, and that is good and is challenging because it means that baggage. Because if I have a polarizing opinion, can sort of like seep into it can become a distraction for the rest of the team to deal with.
Yeah.
And so, but that comes with the territory, man. Like, these are just features of having big presences.
In terms of like your follower count that you've seen, has it been a steady increase? Because I think you're at like 67 or 68,000 on X.
I think on Twitter I'm at or X, I'm at like 71,000 or something.
Okay. Have you seen it like increase any time more recently, or has it been like just consistent since?
It goes in. So X is interesting because it goes in spurts. If you go back to say pre-COVID, I was probably 2,000 followers.
Really?
Yeah. So maybe 3,000. I didn't have a huge presence on X. I had a presence, but it was a small group. And then there was a couple of moments where it just blew up. Joe Weisenthal, I think, discovering me being on the Odd Lots podcast brought this, interesting following. And then I think the secret to X is having a couple of big hitters. I mean, it's just like a musician act. I think creative work this way is like, you literally can take an unknown musician or unknown artist and one thing, or an unknown video, produce a guy on YouTube, and like one thing blows up and they become a household personality. What's the girl?
Haktua girl.
Well, it's the one that did Haktua.
Yeah, the Haktua girl.
Yeah, the Haktua girl. So the prime example of
that opportunity better than anybody I have ever seen.
And she actually stayed at least. I mean, I haven't seen much of her content lately, but like she's been around. She didn't fizzle out. I think in 5 years we may have a different opinion on her, but like for a bit, she was,
I don't know if you guys
a flash in the pan. She sort of embraced it into a thing.
I don't know if you guys know this, but she's now launching a dating advice app, and it's supposedly taking off. At least it's been getting a lot of downloads. I haven't. Maybe I might need to try to download that.
She's putting she's employing. Maybe she saw your negative CAC tweets, Craig.
Look, influencers are original negative CAC, because like if you go to Logan Paul or Mr. Beast have built these enterprises that they're using media to drive top of funnel to something else, and you got to respect it.
I feel like that should be a brand, a negative CAC that could be like all.
I've thought about turning it into like a thing. I just, of all the other stuff I have to do, I don't know that I would ever sell courses. That feels it's just not me. Like it's not my thing to go, I want to sell courses.
I think honestly, you can just watch what you're doing online, right? And that's a pretty good way to understand like how things are.
Yeah, like you don't really need, but there are some. I mean, there are things that people don't realize, like just like tagging people. There's like this trick on X. I don't remember who I was talking to. It's like if you tag people on X, it actually limits your distribution, versus on LinkedIn, you tag people, you gain distribution. There's like these weird things that you learn over time, but you can learn that by reading a bunch of stuff on X where people will talk about that. So that's why I never tag. Like even if I'm talking about someone, I'm not tagging them on X because it actually limits your distribution.
That's odd. Well, knowing how the different algorithms, I guess, work is also part
of it. They change too, right? Like the other thing about like algos is they're subject to some kind of modification. I mean, when I built FreightWaves, I'm convinced I couldn't build it today. When I built FreightWaves, it was all Facebook. Facebook and LinkedIn is what built FreightWaves, and we were taking articles and boosting them. And then the other thing we did, which you wouldn't do today, is I uploaded like every email address I ever had into like MailChimp or something and sent out newsletters, stuff that today you get in a lot more trouble than you did.
It's more difficult to do.
2017. The things that we did and sort of got away with, petty crimes, we'll call them.
Yeah.
So
cool.
What's you've got? What are you doing the rest of the week? Next week, you just chilling? You're kind of
just chilling.
This is the challenge of running multiple businesses. I have not done any work. We're Firecrown's in the middle of a big transaction. We're buying another portfolio of brands, and so I've got to get back to that. I got to get back to my other job this week. So this week's been all about freight and supply chain, and next week we'll. The good news is next week's a holiday, so at least I'll have time to like chill and catch up. Got a lot of work to catch up. I've got lots of emails that I need to get on. So yeah, I mean,
you're going to be responding to emails, huh?
That is a little bit of a plus that the conference just took place now, and then next week is kind of like a short week.
It does help. It does help.
It does definitely
for
help.
Sure.
Well, cool. I don't know if we have time for questions in the audience, but there were a couple here. I don't know if we're almost up on time here. There were a couple here. How can you get, Stefan has one, how can you get more freight personalities into podcasts outside the industry? You got any thoughts on that, Craig?
How can you get more freight personalities into podcasts? Like get them to be on other platforms.
I think the context previously was Craig's appearance.
I see. Yeah. Look, that's all about networking. I mean, the issue is you have to have something. I mean, the advantage I have is I'm able to talk about media negative CAC or concepts that I think apply to everybody. One of the issues in the freight industry is we tend to talk about concepts that most people don't care about. I mean, I think we have to be fair. Is like, unless there's a crisis, no one really wants to hear about trucking.
Right.
And so, you could certainly talk about tariffs or you could talk about the industry, but I think, look, Gord did a good job of leaning into, he was on Tucker Carlson. Like you got it.
Yeah.
He did it.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's just about reaching out to those hosts. I mean, look, there's more podcasts than there should be. And you can start somewhere small and work your way up. The bigger hosts tend to do their own outreach. And I got introduced to, because of my media presence, that's how I got on that podcast. But a lot of it's just like reach out to people, podcasts you like, and introduce yourself and see if there's an opportunity to come talk about a topic. But you got to have something that appeals to them. And I think the problem with Freight is there's not a lot of people outside of our industry that really care about it. So you got to have a different kind of angle.
Yeah, if you got good timing with like different popular events that are happening in Freight that everybody does care about, that's probably
look, I think now if I wanted to get on a major sort of outside the industry podcast, I would probably talk about Donald Trump's victory and why the trucking industry voted 83% or Freight Caviar's audience was 83% supportive of it. And I think that's a story that would appeal to a mainstream podcaster. And because I think people want to hear it. Like, why is Donald Trump so appealing? Like, why was this massive landslide? Because there's still people that are trying to understand that.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
Awesome. Craig, thank you so much for coming on. It was a great event all week. I had a tremendous amount of fun. It was super productive. I'm looking forward very much to going back next year, as always. So thanks again for coming on. And
super happy to hear you. I'd forgotten that we had an audience here. Like, we're just talking among ourselves.
207, 208 people.
That's cool. Where is this? Is this on LinkedIn and X?
This is across LinkedIn, X, and YouTube.
I don't get on LinkedIn. It's a hostile environment. My trolls live on LinkedIn, so I use it as a directory. They need to come into the difference is they can troll me on LinkedIn all day long because people are too nice there. It's kind of lame. Come into the ring, man. Come into X, pull in a domino, and come into X and like show up. Like
that's where the real arena is at for sure.
So, all right, guys, take care.
Awesome. Thanks so much, man.
Bye.
All right, take care.
Yeah.